Hello, thank you for joining me. I'm Pat Speth, author of the Nickel Quilt books, and I love scrappy quilts and I love to use 5-inch squares in many of the quilts that I make. Today's block that I'm going to demo for you today is the Big Dipper block, and it's shown in the quilt on the wall behind me. This is a great quilt for being able to use up all kinds of fabrics from your stash. Let's take a closer look at this quilt now.
This quilt is the perfect place to use those less than beautiful fabrics you might have in your stash. I just group together darks with lights or sometimes darks with mediums. Complete instructions for making this quilt in 3 different sizes are included in the books Nickel Quilts and the Big Book of Nickel Quilts. Ordering information will be at the end of this video. The 3 sizes are Lap, Full, and Queen.
Gorgeous fabrics, ugly fabrics, old fabrics, new fabrics, it doesn't matter. You can use anything you like in this quilt. Now when setting this quilt together, I used the same fabric for the sashing pieces, the setting triangles, and the border. I used a print that wasn't very busy, one that reads as more of a tone-on-tone from a distance. It gives the illusion that the blocks are floating on the surface of the quilt. For the Big Dipper block, I used pairs of 5-inch squares of fabrics in this block so that I could have the same fabric, like the same pinks in each of the blocks here, and then the same turquoise fabrics. What do I mean by a pair of 5-inch squares? A pair is simply 2 5-inch squares that are identical. So a pair of the darker fabrics, think of a pair of earrings or a pair of shoes, so 2 that are identical. A pair of the darker fabrics and 2 squares, or a pair of the lighter fabrics. From the lighter fabrics, we are going to go ahead and draw diagonal lines on the back of that from point to point, and I do that on the back of each of these fabrics, of these squares. Then placing them right sides together on our darker fabrics, the right sides together, lining up all 4 edges. I'm going to go ahead now and sew a scant 1/4 of an inch on each side of that diagonal line. I've stitched that scant 1/4 of an inch on each side of the diagonal line on both of the units. Now, and I set the seam with the iron. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut down that original diagonal line on both of those units. That one and the second unit. Once these have been cut, they are now ready to be pressed to the darker fabric. That's what I'm doing with this. So I'm going to press to the darker fabric. All 4 of these half square triangles have now been pressed to the dark. Everything is going to the dark. On 2 of the units, I have drawn diagonal lines on the back of 2 of the units. I've drawn diagonal lines again. I am going to sew these units together, right sides together, grabbing some of the that had not been with no diagonal line, right sides together, placing fabrics opposite. So darks against the light, darks against the light, nestling these together. And I do like to pin towards the center because that's where I'm going to be sewing again. So I will pin towards the center, make sure that those seams are nestled really nice, and I will go ahead and sew each of the units together, and then I will be ready for some more pressing and cutting. They're all ready to sew. I've sewn the scant 1/4 of an inch on each side of the diagonal line on both of the units. I set the seam with an iron. I'm going to go ahead and cut down that diagonal line. And another cut. Now I'm going to go ahead and press the units. And it really doesn't matter which way you press, no matter what, you're going to be pressing to one light and one dark on each of the units. So press any direction that you like on these. All 4 units have had that last seam pressed, and I was really happy with the way they turned out. The points look good on all those units. So that was worth the time then to nestle those really nicely and to pin those seams before I sewed. Now it's time to trim these guys up. I'm going to trim them to 4 inches. The easiest way to trim these guys to 4 inches is I'm using a smaller mat. A turntable works great. I'm going to put a piece of shelf liner over the unit. I have a hole cut out. That hole is going to go right over the center, that additional bulk right there. I'm using a 4-inch square ruler, placing the diagonal lines of the ruler over my diagonal seam lines, lining those up. That looks good all the way around. Trimming up, trimming over, pressing harder on those dog ears, spinning that mat, trimming up, trimming over. And that looks really good. Nice sharp points out here. I will continue trimming the rest of those units. And while I'm trimming, I'll go ahead and tell you why I started, or that I decided to make this quilt. And I was teaching a workshop in the state of Kansas about a month or so ago, and one of the workshop participants brought in her quilt, her Big Dipper quilt that I taught there 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. And it was so fun to see that quilt again. And when I see one that one of my students has made, it always reminds me of, oh, how fast and fun that quilt was to make. So I thought, I'm just going to go ahead and demo that on YouTube, because it was a fun quilt to make and to be able to use up so many fabrics. One more to go. And when I am stitching away in my studio, and when it comes time to do this trimming, I'm constantly listening to audiobooks. I always used to say books on tape, but I'm trying to remember to say audiobooks or books on MP3, because that's what I listen to. And the time goes so fast. All 4 units have been trimmed, and we are ready to sew these together. I've sewn the 2 rows, the units in the 2 rows together. And the top row, I pressed this direction, the bottom row in this direction. I'm now ready to join that center seam, to sew that center seam. I've sewn that center seam and pressed. Great looking points here in the center. I'm excited about that. That's all there is to making this block. Another wonderful block, and it was so fast and easy to make from 5-inch squares of fabrics. Now in my quilt, I used stash fabrics, but this is a great quilt, a great block to use charm packs on. And in my next video, I'm going to go ahead and demo for you how to organize the fabrics within a pair of charm pack packets to create a block with lots of fun contrast in them. Thanks for joining me today. And until I post my next video, have fun making your quilts.
All the information for making the Big Dipper quilt in 3 different sizes can be found in the books Nickel Quilts and the Big Book of Nickel Quilts. These books, as well as all my other books and patterns, can be ordered from my website. I've included a link to my website below in the video description area. When you purchase a book from my website, you can receive a free pattern of your choice from any of my published patterns. Write the name of the pattern in the inscription area next to your book selection. 1 free pattern per book purchased. Yes, if you purchase more than 1 book, you may select a free pattern for each book purchased. You must write in the pattern name at the time of purchase. If a pattern name is not written in, a free pattern will not be shipped after the book is shipped. Purchases from my website will help fund the creation and production of more nickel quilt videos for all to enjoy and learn from. Thank you.